Olaf Tryggvason was born in the dark and cold lands of Norway's northern shores. His childhood was spent amidst harsh seas, enchanting mountains, and wild nature. These lands were where Vikings could deeply feel the essence of their spirit. Here, courage, strength, and the ability to survive were more important than anything else. From a young age, Olaf discovered his passion for the seas. While dreaming of setting sail on ships, he grew up with the teachings of his mother. True kings are not just warriors, but leaders who unite their people with their faith. These words placed a great responsibility on him at a very young age. Olaf's mother taught him the rich culture and history of the Vikings, while also guiding him to become a strong and courageous leader. However, Olaf's path would be much more than that of an ordinary Viking warrior. His destiny would be shaped not only by warfare, but also by his role as a leader who unites his people. But this journey would come at a great cost, filled with many challenges and hardships. At a young age, Olaf lost his father. His father was one of Norway's leading warriors, who had won many victories and displayed his might against enemies. However, he was killed by a trap set by his enemies. After his father's death, a rage grew in Olaf's heart. "I must avenge my father and take back the throne of Norway," he thought. As a young Viking prince, he had dedicated himself not only to avenging his father, but also to becoming a leader who unites Norway. However, the greatest obstacle he would face on this journey was not his enemies, but the deeply rooted beliefs of his people. The Vikings were firmly attached to their pagan beliefs. Worshipping gods, nurturing superstitions, and remaining loyal to ancestral traditions were the foundations of Viking life. Olaf understood the power of these traditions, but was also aware of the change that would shape Norway's future. He knew that he must be more than just a warrior. He had to be a reformer as well. To secure Norway's future, he aimed to change his people's beliefs. This journey would cost him dearly. Nevertheless, Olaf's abilities were not limited to just warfare. At a young age, he demonstrated great leadership skills. Behind his victories was not only sword and blood, but also his ability to persuade his people backed by their trust in him. However, this was much more difficult struggle, especially for a people so deeply committed to their pagan beliefs. There was an internal struggle, as well as powerful external threats. Olaf had to fight not only his enemies, but also his people in his pursuit of the Norwegian throne. One day, an event occurred that would mark a turning point in Olaf's life. He met a leader from another Viking tribe. This leader offered Olaf a great opportunity. However, this opportunity would require him to win victories with his sword, but also to change his people's beliefs. Olaf accepted the offer, and from that moment on, he began to think not just as a warrior, but as a ruler. Olaf saw leading his people to Christianity as a duty. In contrast to pagan beliefs, Christianity offered new strength and new hope. He believed that for the Norwegian people to adapt to a changing world, they needed to change their faith. However, this was a difficult journey. The old pagan leaders did not want to abandon their loyalty to their gods. Therefore, Olaf's leadership was not only about battles, but also about building a bridge between these faiths. Olaf took a significant step towards Christianity. He began teaching his people this new faith and persuading them. However, this process was filled with great difficulties. On one side were the old pagan leaders, and on the other side were the people who supported the new faith. This battle would not only determine the fate of a people, but also the future of Norway. Olaf's story was about more than just battles. It was the union of ideals, beliefs, and peoples. It was the struggle of a leader who sought to unite his people not only through strength, but also through the right faith,
When Olaf Tryggvason took his first steps on the path of Christianity, he knew he would face many challenges. The pagan people of Norway were deeply rooted in their traditions, and Olaf's attempt to bring about this innovative change would be met with great resistance. However, Olaf saw himself not only as a leader, but also as a teacher. His goal was not to make Norway just a kingdom victorious in battles, but also a civilization shaped by a strong faith. At first, the people viewed Olaf's efforts to bring Christianity with skepticism. Pagan temples still stood, and people who worshipped the old gods continued to resist change. Olaf had to use more than just sword and victory to persuade his people. He had to also rely on the message of peace and love offered by the religion. But no one could have predicted how difficult this would be. One day, Olaf came face to face with one of the most powerful pagan leaders in Norway. This leader had a significant influence over the people and strongly resisted Olaf's efforts to change their beliefs. This meeting was a critical moment that would shape Olaf's future. The pagan leader believed that Olaf's acceptance of Christianity and his attempt to guide his people toward this new faith would weaken his power. A tense negotiation began between the two. Olaf was fighting not only as a leader, but also as a reformer. At the end of the meeting, Olaf was offered only one choice: to continue down the path of Christianity and lose his people, or to remain loyal to the traditional pagan beliefs and stay a leader in the hearts of his people. Olaf thought for a moment and decided to follow his faith. He knew that he was not just a warrior, but a teacher who would guide his people. This decision was not only a personal battle for him, but also a turning point for the future of Norway. Olaf launched a great campaign to Christianize all of Norway. In every village, town, and settlement, he gathered the people and began teaching them Christianity. However, he knew he had to take one more step. To bring about such a significant change, wisdom alone was not enough. He needed a power that would mobilize his people. This power had to be obtained not by frightening or threatening them, but by persuading them with faith. As in every battle, Olaf was trying to win both hearts and minds. Olaf's efforts were bearing fruit more and more each day. Christianity began to spread across Norway, starting from the remote villages and extending to broader regions. However, the opposing faction was still large, and Olaf had to continue his conflicts with them. Destroying pagan temples and ending old traditions was not an easy task. With every step, Olaf became a growing legend in the eyes of his people. They began to see him not only as a warrior, but also as their savior. Despite all his success, a fear began to grow within Olaf. While Christianity had become a source of trust and hope in the eyes of his people, the strong resistance of the old pagan leaders still posed a great threat to Olaf. At this point, Olaf's abilities and decisions would determine not only the fate of Norway, but also the fate of all Scandinavia. Every step he took would solidify his leadership and shape the future of Scandinavia. By the end of the chapter, Olaf had become a great leader in the eyes of his people. However, his inner struggles were still ongoing. The conflict of beliefs was not merely about converting to a new religion, it was a struggle to shape the future of his people and create a new civilization. Olaf was not only seeing Norway as a piece of land, but also a great step toward the rebirth of his people.
Olaf Tryggvason had made significant progress in Christianizing the people of Norway, but this process would not be easy. Every victory earned him more enemies, and each new step brought both internal and external conflicts. Olaf had become a hero in the eyes of his people, but a leader's true test is not seen when they stand by their people, but when they stand with them during the most difficult times. The Christian faith had begun to take root in every village, town, and home in Norway.
However, there was still significant opposition. Pagan leaders were strongly resisting Olaf's acceptance of this change. In many villages, people who worshipped the old gods were still living, and this situation was becoming an ever-growing threat to Olaf. The greatest threat came from rebellions led by Viking leaders who defended the old pagan beliefs. One morning, Olaf learned that one of the local pagan leaders in a distant region of Norway was holding a major ritual. This was a significant opportunity for Olaf to disregard his beliefs and attempt to return his people to paganism. The power of the pagan leaders posed a great threat, but Olaf's determination was resolute in eliminating this threat. He set out and prepared to stop the ritual. Olaf donned both his armor and sword. For him, this was not just a battle, but a test for the future of his people. To unite Norway and keep his people together, this struggle had to end in victory. However, this did not mean the battle was just a physical struggle. He also had to win the hearts, beliefs, and determination of his people. As Olaf set out, he was accompanied by a loyal army. Yet as he attempted to change his people's beliefs and introduce them to Christianity, he had to face many who opposed these changes. Many Viking warriors still defended their old gods and traditions. Confronting these people was not just a physical victory for Olaf, but a turning point for the future of his people. When Olaf arrived at the heart of the rebellion, he began to face the pagan leaders with great resolve. This confrontation was not just the struggle of one leader, but a conflict between two different belief systems. Olaf held deep respect for the old pagan leaders, but he knew he had to win this battle for the future of his people. The battle began. The pagan leaders put up fierce resistance against Olaf, but Olaf's determination and Christian faith became the key to his victory. Slowly but surely, the pagan resistance was broken. This victory was not only a military victory, but also an ideological one. Olaf had persuaded both his army and his people, forcing them to unite on the path of Christianity. The victory made Olaf the true ruler of Norway. However, the cost of this victory was great. Thousands of people had to accept this change. Every victory won by the sword also opened a wound deep within the human soul. Olaf had succeeded in uniting his people and bringing them under a single faith, but the price had been paid in blood. After the victory, Olaf grew even larger in the eyes of his people. But this victory brought him loneliness. As a leader, uniting his people, bringing them together under the same faith, and establishing a great kingdom came at the cost of more and more loss with each step. Now he was not only a leader in battle, but also the leader of the hearts of his people. Olaf's struggle was not just about wars, it was a war to change his people's beliefs, to give them a new identity. However, this process had changed Olaf. Each victory had left a wound in his inner world. Christianity was a great opportunity for the future of Norway, but it also created a culture that conflicted with old traditions. Olaf had paid the price for uniting his people, but every obstacle he faced made him stronger and more determined. After this great victory, Olaf's leadership was further solidified. However, his people's beliefs were still deeply rooted, and Olaf would continue on a journey to build the future of both his kingdom and his faith. As a leader advancing on the path of Christianity, he was ready to take steps that would change the fate of not only Norway, but all of Scandinavia. After Olaf Tryggvason broke the pagan resistance in Norway, he had become a hero in the eyes of his people. However, the loneliness that came with victory reminded him of the true meaning of his kingdom and his responsibilities. He had taken great steps on the path of Christianity, shaping all of Norway with this new faith. But building an empire was not limited to uniting the people. It also required a greater vision, courage, and constant struggle. Olaf wanted to rule not only the borders of Norway, but also the entire region of Scandinavia, surpassing the limits of his people. This vision not only involved a religious transformation, but also the unification of the entire geography. Christianity had made him a stronger leader, but this power also posed a great danger. To build an empire, he needed much more. In Olaf's eyes, after the victory in Norway, the next targets were Sweden and Denmark. He burned with the desire to unite all of Scandinavia. However, this path would bring many enemies and opposing leaders. Olaf also had to fight against noble families and powerful Viking leaders. The victories he gained in his Christianization efforts not only gave him Norway, but also the opportunity to conquer all of Scandinavia. However, this journey would not bring easy success in the short term. First, Olaf decided to set his sights on Denmark. The powerful leaders in Denmark had noticed Olaf's steps on the path of Christianity and his success in uniting his people. Therefore, they harbored great hostility towards Olaf. However, Olaf's leadership and the strength of his army had turned him into a major threat. The government in Denmark was opposing every move Olaf made. By always standing with his people, he would increase his power and achieve a great victory. Olaf was not only using wars, but also diplomacy and strategy to achieve his goals. Before taking action against Denmark, he started forming alliances with leaders in surrounding territories. In these lands where strong leaders and armies were present, forming a coalition opened the path not only to fulfill his dream of building an empire, but also to secure the future of his people. The campaign against Denmark was a great test for Olaf. It was not only a conquest, but also a battle that would determine the future of Norway and all of Scandinavia. While preparing his army, he made great efforts to win the support of his people. This war would determine his place in the eyes of his people, not only as a ruler, but also as a visionary leader. In the early days of the war, Olaf's army was winning victories rapidly. However, the leaders in Denmark tried every way to stop Olaf. The true nature of the war became a struggle not only between swords and soldiers, but also between tactics, intelligence, and the determination of the people. Olaf's war strategies were always one step ahead, surprising his enemies and boosting his people's morale. One of Denmark's most powerful leaders, Sweyn Forkbeard, became Olaf's greatest obstacle. Sweyn showed great resistance to Olaf and decided to do everything in his power to protect his people. However, Olaf's determination to win was powerful enough to break Sweyn's resistance. After prolonged clashes, Olaf succeeded in defeating Sweyn and his army. This victory opened the doors of Denmark to Olaf, not just Norway. Olaf's victory was not only a military success, it was also the herald of the unification of powerful leaders and peoples across Scandinavia. Olaf's first step towards building an empire had been successful. However, this victory would bring him new enemies and greater struggles. With each victory, Olaf would gain more power and gradually take further steps on his path to empire building. Olaf's future would not only be shaped by winning battles, but also by uniting his people. Christianity would not only help him build an empire, but also serve as the tool to unite this great people. However, this unity would not be achieved merely by wars,
but by winning the hearts of the people. Olaf's struggle was beyond the establishment of a kingdom. It was a leadership journey that sought to unite all of Scandinavia.
After Olaf Tryggvason's victory in Denmark, he had become one of the strongest leaders in Scandinavia. He was no longer just a figure shaping the fate of Norway, but of the entire region. However, victories often bring loneliness. Olaf desired more than just the lands won through wars, the unification of a people, the birth of a civilization, but leadership is not something everyone wants to see. He might be a hero in the eyes of his people, but the internal loneliness was proportional to the greatness of his victory. Olaf was a hero in the eyes of his people, but within himself he felt a great void. With each victory, as he united his people, the loneliness grew stronger. As a leader, he had cared for his people, yet there was an emptiness in his heart. Battles, warriors, and lands could be won, but the loneliness in a person's soul cannot be cut through by a warrior's sword. After taking a significant step toward creating a unified empire in Scandinavia, Olaf's eyes were set on even greater goals. However, the loneliness he felt within his soul threatened his leadership power. He now realized that he had to rule his people not only with a sword, but also by winning their hearts. He visited every village in his kingdom, spoke one-on-one with his people, shared their beliefs and hopes. After each victory, amidst the crowds, he could only hear his own voice. Yet he knew that every victory had its price. While a united people moved toward building a strong empire, a leader had to endure a great internal struggle. Olaf was searching for a way to rebuild his people while also filling the void within himself. Beyond the power he had gained in battles, what he truly needed was a search for meaning that would not only win over his people, but also himself. Christianity had strengthened him, but the responsibilities that came with faith were mentally consuming Olaf. Every victory in Scandinavia only created tension for the next battle. His greatest enemy was not only external, but internal. Every moment he devoted to his people led him to question his own identity and beliefs. Olaf had done everything to protect his people and instill the Christian faith in them. However, the true power he sought did not lie in wars alone, but in the trust and love of his people. In the midst of a mental and spiritual crisis, Olaf began to question how much he could truly serve his people as a leader. The light of victory in his eyes faded as he battled the darkness within. One day, Olaf set out alone to visit one of Norway's greatest temples. His purpose was not only to find meaning for himself, but to give direction to his life. However, this temple symbolized the old beliefs of his people. While the pagans worshipped the old gods, Olaf stood alone in front of this temple. In that moment, he thought of the promises, ideals, and struggles he had made to his people. As he advanced on the path of Christianity, he realized how much he had changed. While destroying pagan beliefs, he had succeeded in uniting his people, but the emptiness inside him remained unfilled. In front of the temple, Olaf called out to God, "God, who guides me with your strength and faith for my people, grant me the power to truly love this people." This prayer symbolized Olaf's search for inner peace. He had built an empire, united his people, and won great victories. But beyond these victories, he was searching for meaning to fill the void in the soul of a leader. After some time, Olaf continued to serve his people with all his heart. His legend was not only fed by the lands and victories he had gained, but also by his deep love for his people. He embraced Christianity as a way to keep people united and to teach them real meaning. However, even though Olaf never found the inner peace he had longed for, he would be remembered as a legendary leader because of the wars he fought and the faith he gave to his people. Ultimately, the legend of Olaf Tryggvason became not only the legend of a ruler, but also of a leader who guided the spirit of his people. While laying the foundations of an empire, beyond uniting his people and showing them true meaning, what Olaf truly found was the realization of the power within himself.